So, today on Rising Up by Asia Startup Network, we have Jackie Tan, a serial entrepreneur with experience in finance, education, and artificial intelligence. He shared what it was like founding a startup when he was still a student, the importance of validating your startup idea and how to do it effectively, and his thoughts on startup mentorship. Enjoy! Tell us a little bit more about how was it like for you growing up. We wanted to hear a little bit of your stories before you started this entrepreneurial journey. So, like for example, I'm curious. Like, were there any people around you who also did the same thing before?
Right. So a little bit about myself. So I was born and bred in KL, so I'm Malaysian. And when I was 12, I moved to Singapore to study by myself. Technically not myself, but I was staying in hostels like till, uni. Right, from secondary school, I was in hostel. In JC, I was in hostel. So yeah, I've been living quite independently, largely throughout my life. Mm, so my family. So I grew up hearing that my father's a businessman, but he's quite a hustler. He did quite a few odd jobs here and there while I was growing up. Didn't quite figure out what he did as, as I grew up, but all I heard from my mom was that he did business and whatnot. Whether I was entrepreneurial, I recall the times when in primary school I used to give massages and I would charge my fellow classmates like 10 cent or 20 cent. Of course, I didn't quite know like how much to price it. So I guess that's kind of like the beginning of some kind of entrepreneurship in me, which I didn't quite discover until much later on in my life.
Right. Well, I mean, I guess that was fun. That must be fun, charging your friends a few cents to do massage. Well, I guess that's kind of a smart move to
Yeah.
to kind of test, whether there's a willingness to buy your service in that sense. Yeah. Well, like maybe just digging in a little bit. So, like, what was your childhood ambition? Like, was that anything similar to what you are doing now? Whether this entrepreneurial path was a little bit unexpected.
Okay. So growing up, I grew up on cartoons, right? More specifically, Cartoon Network. One of my favorite cartoon shows was Dexter's Laboratory. So if you haven't watched it, I think it's quite an old cartoon, but basically the premise is about this young kid who's a scientist, and he has an older sister who's a ballerina. So growing up, I guess I enjoyed that show a lot, and I recall like my primary school ambition was to be a scientist, right? Yeah, so it's kind of nice. Well, many years later on, I did manage to enter science, right? I started off my career as a life scientist. In fact, I did lots of different research in labs. Yeah, so I must say, yeah, I managed to achieve what I set up, what I said I'd be as a kid. Kind of fun.
I see. Yeah, perhaps maybe tell us more about how you started your first company, because you said you started your career as a live scientist, and then you're an entrepreneur. So tell us more about like what happened, like how did that actually happen?
Okay. What one would call an accidental entrepreneur. So, but before I get into the whole like how I got started in the first place, right? I want to share a bit about how like all the necessary pieces right before I fell into it. So, when I was working in the lab, I saw how my collaborators were using coding to analyze like genomic data and like big data and everything, and I was very envious because here I was working in the lab doing experiments day in day out, and all those guys had to do is just sit down on your butts and just like type a few lines of code, right, and publish papers. So I decided, okay, you know what, I'm gonna like learn coding and try to be a bit more like them. And after learning coding for a while, I realized, okay, now that I've learned how to code, I should practice. I should actively practice it. And I started going for hackathons, right? So I decided to go for a hackathon just to practice my skills that I've learned. And it was from the hackathon, right, where I reconnected with an old friend of mine who eventually became my co-founder for my very first company. I remember quite vividly because the hackathon was in the August of 2015, right? That was many years ago, And we sat on it until 2016, where we decided, okay, you know what, let's do something about it. So we were curious to see how far we would take this idea, and yeah, so that was how I got started, right?
Okay, interesting. And tell us what your first startup was about. From the hackathon and to like all the way to where you took it eventually.
Okay. The initially from the hackathon. Oh yeah, by the way, the name of the thing was called Fund My Life, or FML
Yeah,
for
that's
short.
what.
And the reason why it's named as such because of a few reasons. Firstly, during the hackathon, it was like maybe 2 a.m. and I haven't quite figured out what the name of the company would be. And I was like, and back then, FML was very popular, right? A collection of stories of people messing up, and and I was like, FML. And then I thought, hey, FML sounds, right. Okay, why don't I work backwards and see what I can call it? And thus it became Fund My Life, or FML for short. So FML it started off as a finance calculator for users, right? For consumers to kind of like calculate their expenses and everything. That was kind of like the first version. And along the way, my team and we pivoted like three times, right? Three times to the final version, which was a question and answer platform for financial planning questions. Yeah, and that was how we roll with it for the rest of its time.
Okay, interesting.
Yeah.
May I ask? So because you said you pivoted 3 times, so what were the basis of for the pivot to happen? Like, what were you thinking back then?
Wow. The reason why we pivoted so many times is because back then nobody taught us, taught us what entrepreneurship means. Nobody taught us what it means to run an idea. We were pretty much under the impression that build it and they will come kind of mentality, right? Because I think we read the wrong things online. And initially, when we built the calculator, we thought, hey, okay, how come no one's using it? And we thought, okay, let's pivot one time and try a different thing altogether. And we built. So the first pivot was into a listing, right? A listing of financial advisors. And we thought, okay, hypothetically, this was what went through our minds. We create a listing, a user drops by our platform, looks up someone from the listing, and then just connects with him or her offline. So that was what we thought, right? The listing, people signed up. Okay, people signed up onto the listing, but they weren't using it. The users were not using it the way we thought they would. And after a while, we are like, okay, you know what? Why don't we try something else? And we pivoted back into a a calculator, but for financial advisors instead. That's because we thought, okay, you know what? Let's go back to the whole calculator route. And to our horror, we realized that the financial advisor agencies that we approached, they all had their calculators done by them already, right? So to our horror, so there wasn't much of a market need, even though there is a market. So we thought, okay, you know what? Oh man, this is tough. Are we gonna give up, or what's gonna happen? And for the first time, we finally contacted someone within our user base to talk to them, right? And it sounds kind of silly, right? Because the whole idea is to like speak to people as soon as possible. But once again, we didn't really have that kind of training. We spoke to one of the users, and the user said, you know what? I actually just want to ask a question, right? And there wasn't any way to do so. That was when there was kind of a light bulb moment for my co-founder and I, and we started looking into different ways in which we can help people ask questions. And yeah, so that was how the final version of FML ended up as, right, a Q&A platform.
Okay, no, well that's interesting. So what happened afterwards? The Q&A platform. Tell us a little bit more about the stories.
So after we set up the Q&A platform, right, users started coming in to ask questions, and so what we did was a bit different. It was the Q&A platform was anonymous and private, meaning the questions don't really get read by anyone else other than like the financial advisor that we assign them to. So it's anonymous one way, meaning the user knew who they were speaking to, but not the other way around. So this is to give the users a bit more confidence and also to review things. forum style posts about financial planning is a bit tricky because nobody really wants to talk about their own finances out loud on forums. So by having a safe space, it was a lot easier to facilitate those kind of conversations. And we were popular for a while, right? Because on top of like the new way of doing things, we also wrote quite a lot of like articles. We really pour a lot of effort into content marketing, so that got us a lot of eyeballs, a lot of users, and yeah, so things picked up from there.
Okay, yeah, that's cool. It's also interesting that how content marketing also kind of full that part of the growth also after you kind of managed to find the exact problem that you're trying to solve.
Yeah.
So I also want to ask a little bit about the pivots. I mean, pivoting 3 times. I mean, that's quite a lot. And over like how what was the period of time? Like how long was the period?
Right. It took I think it took around like 7 months, 8 months.
And I guess throughout that period, when you figure that okay, maybe it was not really going as well as you expected. Like, did you have the option to I don't know give up or like because it can be quite frustrating to
Yeah.
pivot and pivot and pivot. Yeah,
Yeah.
what was your thought process back then?
So yeah, honestly, I think before each pivot, we were very, 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 very close to just call it quits. Yeah, in retrospect, I think there were many very close shaves, but we always told ourselves like, oh, you know what, we were dumb, right, and young back then. We said, okay, you know what, one more time.
Right, right.
Mm.
I guess it's also amazing that you kind of made that decision. I would say rather quick decision over like three pivoting decision over a period of seven months. I mean, some I guess from some of the stories that we heard, some people take I don't know maybe more than a year or two or even longer to make that one decision. But I mean, it's tough, right? It's tough to kind of give up on your first version
Yeah,
of
yeah.
baby and then move on to solve another problem and kind of make that decision again and you go
Mm.
for another problem. So and also I guess when you first started working on the platform, and you were still a student. It's quite interesting because you at that point in time you have to kind of juggle your studies also,
Yeah.
and kind of also building it, probably talking to people, kind of get the project up to speed. So how was that experience like? Tell us a little bit more about that.
It was, I think, in one word, tiring, right? Like, there's no other way to describe it. But it also required a lot of discipline, and very tight time management. So in the day, I will be doing my student work, right, my research and everything, and then in the evening is when I, hang up my lab coat and start working on my startup. I was frankly quite tiring because I was studying in NTU, and I had, let's say if I had a meeting, right, I had to like rush out of school and then head to town where the meeting was, or like go somewhere where networking was, so on and so forth.
Right.
Yeah.
How was your social life back then? I know it's probably not a question to ask, but
My social life pretty much non-existent, or at least I found
right.
it somehow to like combine my social life and my work. So I think for the longest time, most of the people and my friends I know of, they all come from work. Yeah, startup work, fellow entrepreneurs. Yeah,
I guess it's also nice, if you, like, for example, when you are working on a startup and you are surrounded by the people who kind of have similar goals and whatnot, you kind of have that form that support network to support each other, whenever, things happen and all of that. I think that's also kind of nice. I mean, it was just a question that I wanted to ask. I kind of knew the answer already because
yeah,
you're kind of doing research and working on startups and
yeah, yeah.
yeah, so that's why I thought it was just fun to poke a little bit. Yeah, so that was your first startup. Then after that, you went on to do the second. So
Yeah.
I was just curious, was there anything that you have done differently, knowing what you know now, and and also while reflecting on the journey of building your first startup?
I would have spoken to people first before building things rather than just rush into it headlong, right? And validate assumptions, make sure that there's some kind of market need.
Do you have any like ways to, so for example, so person A is doing something, they want to validate their assumption and hypothesis, and how do they find people to talk to, and also like do you have a framework or steps for someone who wants to validate the assumptions to go through?
Okay, so this is also closely related to my second company, right? So the framework I had is relatively I wouldn't say simple, but at least it's quite low cost. It doesn't take too much money, right? So for my first company, it took me more than a year to get my first dollar, right? On the other hand, for my second company, how I validated it in the first place, right, was that I set up a Google form. I ran a Facebook ad, garnered interest through that Google form. Right, it was a B2C idea. I can tell you more about it in a bit. But basically, the methodology involves just not building. You can spend, but you shouldn't build. Right, it's better than you spend money validating a hypothesis rather than spending more building it in terms of both money and time. So within 2 weeks, right, I got my first dollar, even without building a product, even without building some kind of a landing page whatsoever.
Okay, well, I mean, that's interesting. I think we briefly talked about that before, but I didn't know that it was a Google form with an ads. So maybe, yeah, tell us more about what it was about and how did you decide even, to actually just run ads, to drive people to your Google form?
I was quite proud of it. The conversion was pretty good because I ran a $50 ad on Facebook, right, and I got someone paying like 300 plus for it, and it's within less than 2 weeks, right, from ideation to validation. Okay, so to give you a bit of context about what it is, towards the end of my first company, I started teaching Python and data science in a coding academy. It was at that coding academy when I realized that students, they go through like things like skills future courses, they go through things like Coursera, so on and so forth. They meaning these students, right, still struggle with building things, right? They, let's say if they want to like code independently, let's say if they want to like start looking for a job in data, for example, it's impossible simply because they don't have enough hands-on experience. So what happened was that I decided to start a kind of like tuition for data science. I have no other way to put it. Basically, it's like data science mentorship, right? Service as the first version. And I tried validating it. Basically, I ran an ad to those people who knew like data science and see if they were willing and able to pay for additional like mentorship and coaching. And yeah, that was where I got my validation that people needed it.
I see. Was there any trick that you put on your ads? Like you are just driving people to the Google form and they pay hundred.
Oh no, not even that. The funnel was actually quite bad. They
Okay.
sign up, they leave their contact details, their Telegram. I contact them, I speak to them, and then they convert.
Oh, okay. Wow. Okay.
Yeah, correct. Okay, so I mean, the messaging has to be as clear as possible, right? Like, what is it that you're solving? All right, what is it? What is the problem that they have? And if you hit the mark on the problem that they face and what you offer to solve that problem, so the problem they face is, done a course on Coursera, done a course on Udemy, and still suck? Question mark, right? It was quite tongue in cheek, but I think it delivered the message clearly, and that's why when I spoke to them, they were keen to sign up.
Right. Were you the only one who worked on it? Like, how was it like?
Right. So at the coding academy, right, I reconnected with a university junior of mine, and after we both left the school, I caught up with her one day. I said, hey, do you wanna like start something together? And she was like, yeah, okay. And then that was how we started, yeah. But this was after, of course, validation, because I didn't want to like start something with someone while pre-validation. So I think that was quite exciting. So the initial thing was a service, right? Data science mentorship. We eventually added an apprenticeship component to it, meaning, right, what the apprenticeship involves is we go up to companies, we say, hey, we have data scientists on our side. Do you have a project that you'd like us to work on, right? Are you hiring as well? So we wanted to kill a few birds with one stone for everyone involved. Companies, maybe they want to like have some kind of data science product, right, prototyped for their respective use cases. And then we have students on the other side who are trained but not quite experienced. So what we did was that we kind of like we designed 2-month kind of apprenticeship, place the students inside and guide them to work on it. So it became sort of a on-the-job assessment kind of thing. And at the end of it, the companies can decide whether to hire or these people or not.
Okay, interesting. And there wasn't anything alike in the market previously when you started, or like what made you different at that point in time?
The fact that it was kind of like an end-to-end service, right? Meaning not only did we scope, so we started with scoping, so it's almost like a consultancy, right? We work with the clients and then try to figure out what we can do in that short span of time, and also to fulfill the hiring needs as well. So the apprenticeship was great because it allowed people from non-traditional data backgrounds to enter the job market at that time. And I dare say right now we still don't have anything like that, right? That kind of model, the apprenticeship model. That's something that I'm proud of. It's good. We did something completely new. Yeah.
Right. And why is there no such thing in the market? Like, do you have any clue on?
My hypothesis is that because the government, okay, I mean, I'm gonna say the government's doing a great job, right, with providing support and everything. But the thing about having strong support sometimes is that it leads to focus on a certain area. So most of the courses they focus on the basics, and then everything else after that is pretty much self-driven. And unfortunately, that the part after the basics, right, is where the greatest gap lies. So we did both a kind of like a mentorship and the apprenticeship, right, until COVID happened. Then we had to retire the apprenticeship because no one was hiring, right? No one wanted data science products. So we focused on the mentorship, and eventually we productized that service and turned all the training into kind of like a 10-year series. Like data science 10-year series, pretty much. Like drills, things suited for different levels across all kinds of different industries, so that students who wanted to get better, they can purchase and download and work on it.
Okay, well, interesting. And what happened after that?
Oh, no, we ran that for a while, then we got acquired.
And I guess just now you also mentioned a little bit about mentorship and having people having the support network and stuff like that. Well, I guess in the recent years, the idea of having mentorship, having mentors, or mentors and mentee pairing has become a little bit more popular. But I think it's somehow, I guess, it's still an idea that most people don't really know how to approach.
Yeah.
So yeah, what are your thoughts? Did you have like good mentors? Like, what was your experience with?
So my experience with mentorship is that personally I had to figure things out by myself a lot. And as such, over time I've built kind of an empathy for those in for those who were in my positions before. I've been quite fortunate to be in various settings where I can offer some kind of mentorship, be it long term or short term. I think I start off mentoring teams in hackathons. I'll come back and then like just help mentor teams. For longer term things, right? So right now I am the CTO in residence in the Venture Builder program in the Singapore University of Social Sciences. And that's where I have longer term relationships with the teams there, where I'm able to kind of like point them in the right direction if they choose to engage me. The thing about mentorship is that it takes two hands to clap, right? You have a willing mentor, but the potential or the existing mentee has to be the one who keeps up with the momentum and cadence. It's very important.
Right. So from a mentor perspective, how should one go about doing it as a mentee? When this person is engaged in a mentor-mentee relationship.
I think the thing about mentees, right, is that they must understand that this in this particular setting is really to shortcut their learning, right? You have someone who has already gone through it, and sometimes they can avoid time-consuming mistakes just by listening to the mentor. Sometimes, like you really have to have an open personality or like receptive, right? It's not like you have to blindly listen to whatever the mentor says, right? But you should at least be open to the idea. Sometimes I have like me saying stuff and then the mentee goes out and ignores it and then comes back a few months later saying, "Ah, yeah, I should have listened to you."
Well, I guess that's the validation that you get that the mentors get eventually, I guess.
Yeah.
Right, right. Okay, cool. Yeah. So what are the commonly asked questions that you get, when you're engaged in these settings? Just curious, especially like for, from the first time founders, aspiring founders. Yeah.
It's a very good question. Usually, most of the time I'm in problem solving mode, right? So, and also because of my position in more of a more tech mentor for founders kind of role, I always get asked questions on like, oh, how do I get this thing done, right? I still think that there's this impression that founders are either looking for someone technical or they can't seem to move without finding some kind of technical help. I tell them all the time, like, hey, don't focus on the tech, focus on the product. Those two are two different things. Focus on solving your customer problem, how you can do it in a low tech manner. Because like even for myself, even though I do a lot of coding, even though I build things all the time, to me I think must never forget that it's all about the customer, really, the user or the customer. Yeah. So like I'll try like tell them to focus on that and see how they can go to market as fast as possible. You have founders
Just
that
like
are,
just like how you did our Facebook ads before.
correct. That experiment left a very deep impression in me. It made me realize that you don't really need to build anything in order to sell. I have met founders who say, I want to use AI and do this and do that. The thing is, like, why would you want to invest so much time and money into building something where your users, like your daily active users, is just like in the single digits, right?
Right.
Yeah.
So apart from what you did previously, running Facebook ads, driving them to your Google form, what are the other ways for them to validate quickly?
Hmm. I'd say it's really just going up to people and talking to them, really. I recently mentored this team. I like them because they're real hustlers. What they do is they really hit the streets and spoke to people. Yeah. They were working on an app that could recommend activities to couples. So based on their love languages, based on their profile, based on everything, right? So that was kind of like what they were working on. But to get users for it, to get the initial users for feedback and everything, they really set out. This was a couple months ago, right? They set out to the streets and were grabbing people off the streets and asking them, "Hey, do you want to like try my app and stuff?" So that's cool, right? And the thing is, they haven't even built the app yet. So they were running around with like mock-ups and whatnot, and just getting people to sign up for it. So like that's the kind of thing which is more important, really, to get insights from their user base. Right? Imagine if they spend time and money to build the app, and then they go to market, and then nobody really likes it. Then they would have spent all the effort and time for nothing.
Yeah, I think that's really important, especially when with the team when the project is still in the early stage. Yeah, it's especially now after we learn from your experience, it's
Yeah.
more ideal in most cases to actually go to the user first and understand what they're going through, whether there's a need for the solution before actually building it.
Yeah.
Yeah. So what are you doing now? What's your next project? What are you up to?
Oh man, it's very tiring, right? So I'm still recovering, believe it or not. It's been over a year now, right? I sold that company at the end of 2021, so I've been working in the acquirers company since. So these days I hit products in the company that acquired me, and I'm just biding my time, just resting,
Just resting.
Yeah.
Is there anything you have in mind? Where's
Uh,
your, I don't know, what are you up to next?
what am I up to next? So like these days, I just build random things and then to see what sticks. But I don't think I'm quite ready to venture out into a new company yet.
Mhm.
Simply because just like I said, I'm tired lah. It takes a huge toll on you, both
Mhm.
physically and mentally. I think mentally I'm fine. It's just the physical part that's not. And yeah,
Okay, cool.
yeah.
So perhaps looking back or at your experience and all that, is there any moment that you feel like extremely proud of,
Mm,
over this years and so on?
wow, there are many moments to be proud of. I think it's the satisfaction when the people you help, right, be your users, customers, or partners or whatever, they thank you for bringing value to whatever that they do, right? It's satisfying, right? It's satisfying because they say, no one else does this. I'm pretty competitive in nature, so like when they say, oh, this done this before, it's amazing. Thank you for everything. I'm like, yeah, it's cool, feels good. A few good ones, like customers praising us over and saying that we are way better than competitors, for example, for the first one. Second company, my students who gone through the apprenticeship program being like immensely grateful for the fact that I managed to help them get a job. For the record, the apprenticeship hiring rate was like 100%, like literally 100%. Every single apprentice that went through our program got a job offer.
Okay.
Yeah,
Wow.
yeah.
There must be some magic in your in your program
I don't.
somehow.
I think again, it all goes back to value, right? And how you question kind of like basic assumptions. You work backwards, right? Why are companies like so desperate to hire data scientists? Because they want master students or those with PhD. Now, why do you want those with masters and PhD? It's a quality that they know how to do work or like they have experience. Then in that case, why can't someone with hands-on experience do it, right? So these are the things which I questioned. quite often when I was teaching. And that's the magic, really just questioning those basic assumptions. And I think to a certain extent, that's what all founders do, right? Really question fundamental assumptions about this world, and then trying to go out and do it differently.
Talk to people first
Yeah,
before
talk to
doing it
people first,
differently.
do deep thinking, work from first principles.
Yeah, I think that's the one of the main key takeaways that I have from this call, from this conversation. I think that really impressed me quite a bit, because, I mean, as we talk to many people, it seems quite a simple idea to understand, but again, a lot of times when founders just started out, sometimes it's hard, like, psychologically, mentally, it's hard. Like, okay, I have this great idea and I want to validate it, whether there are people who are willing to pay for it, and that takes going out to them to ask. And there's also like this layer, fear of rejection, and okay,
Yeah.
what happens if they say no? What do you do? Stuff like that, right?
Every no is easier lah. I think everyone, fundamentally at the core of everyone, right? People don't like being disliked, right? And when you're rejected, it's just an extension of that, right? You take it personally. But if you're able to divorce that feeling of rejection from the idea that you're being disliked or whatever, okay. So wait, let me take a few steps back. The rejection sucks, right? Because it may seem like rejection is like rejecting them because their ideas are an extension of themselves, right? So like when a potential user says no, it's just like sucks, and then they take it personally, and that shouldn't be the case. Just take that no, take that L, and move on. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. Okay. And well, I guess last thing that I want to ask, which is something that we ask every guest who comes onto the podcast. Well, so as you know, so the name of this podcast is called Rising Up. So just by hearing this term, I want to know, like, what do you associate with this term?
Yeah. So two things. First thing is rising up. I mean, cliche, but rising up to the challenge, right? Like you see a problem or you encounter something, you rise up to it. But to me, I think rise up is also a nice term because it's like you level up, right? You become better, you rise up. Yep.
Okay, well, thanks for that. I guess we are at the end of our conversation as well. So thank you so much for your time, Jackie.
Thanks for listening to Rising Up by Asia Startup Network. If you stay to the end, please give Rising Up a follow on Spotify, YouTube, or whatever platform that you listen to this on. We loved it, and thank you from the bottom of our heart for your kind gesture of paying this forward. You can also find Asia Startup Network on LinkedIn, where we regularly keep our community posted on anything exciting, relevant, and helpful to the Asia startup ecosystem. And we'll see you again very soon.